I remember reading your book when it first came out, and reading, one incident after the other, and one example after the other, and then getting to the conclusion where you said the Nakba was a product of war, not design, I think were your exact. And I remember reacting almost in shock to that I felt you had mobilized overwhelming evidence that it was a product of design, not war. And I think our discussion today very much reflects, let's say, the dissonance between the evidence and the conclusion. You don't feel that the research that you have conducted and published demonstrates that it was in fact inherent and inbuilt and inevitable. And I think the point that Norm and I are making is that your own historical research, together with that of others, indisputably demonstrates that it does. I think that's a fundamental disagreement we're having here.
Can I actually respond to that? Because this is actually, I think this is emblematic of the entire conversation. I watched a lot of Norm's interviews and conversations in preparation for this, and I hear Norm will say this all over and over and over again. I only deal in facts. I don't deal in hypotheticals. I only deal in facts. I only deal in facts. And that seems to be the case, except for when the facts are completely and totally contrary to the particular point you're trying to push. The idea that Jews would have out of hand rejected any state that had Arabs on it or always had a plan of expulsion is just betrayed by the acceptance of the 47 partition plan.
I don't think you understand politics. Did I just say that there is a chasm that separates your ideology from the limits and constraints imposed by politics and reality? Now, Professor Morris, I suspect, would agree that the Zionist movement from fairly early on was committed to the idea of a Jewish state. I am aware of only one major study, probably written 40 years ago, the binational idea in mandatory Palestine by a woman, I forgot her name now, you'll remember her.
I'm trying to.
Yeah. Okay. But you know the book.
I think so.
Yeah. She is the only one who tried to persuasively argue that the Zionist movement was actually, not formally, actually committed to the binational idea. But most historians of the subject agree the Zionist movement was committed to the idea of a Jewish state. Having written my doctoral dissertation on the topic, I was confirmed in that idea because Professor Chomsky, who was my closest friend for about 40 years, was very committed to the idea that binationalism was the dominant trend in Zionism. I couldn't go with him there. But Professor Morris, you are aware that until the Biltmore Resolution in 1942, the Zionist movement never declared it was for a Jewish state. Why? Because it was politically impossible at the moment until 1942. There is your ideology, there are your convictions, there are your operative plans, and there's also separately what you say in public. The Zionist movement couldn't say in public, we're expelling all the Arabs. They can't say that. And they couldn't even say we support a Jewish state until 1942.
You're conflating two things. The Zionists wanted a Jewish state, yes. Correct. That didn't mean expulsion of the Arabs. Saying, yeah. It's not the same thing. They wanted a Jewish state with a Jewish majority, but they were willing, as it turned out, both in 37 and in 47, and subsequently, to have an Arab minority, a large Arab minority.
There was a transfer.
They were willing to have a large Arab minority in the country, and they ended up with a large Arab minority in the country. 20% of the population in 49 was Arab, and it still is.
They ended up for about 5 minutes before they were expelled. They agreed to it until 47, and then they were gone by March 1949.
What happened in between the rejection of the partition plan and the expulsion of the Arabs?
The Arabs launched the war.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, like, it wasn't random. Like, there's a potential
I
that
agree, it
even
wasn't random.
there was.
I totally agree with that.
Yeah,
it
but
was by design.
You can
It
say
wasn't
that.
random.
You can say that, but in this case, the facts betray you. There was no Arab acceptance of anything that would have allowed for a Jewish state to exist.
Of course
Number
not.
one, and number two, I think that it's entirely possible, given how things happen after war, that this exact same conflict could have played out, and an expulsion would have happened without any ideology at play. That there was a people that disagreed on who had territorial rights to a land. There was a massive war afterwards, and then a bunch of their friends invaded after to reinforce the idea that the Jewish people in this case couldn't have a state. There could have been a transfer regardless.
Anything could have been, but that's not what history is about.
History is about Palestinian rejectionism to any peace deal
As I
over
said,
and over and
as
over
I
again.
said, when the ball was thrown into the court of the United Nations, they were faced with a practical problem. And I, for one, am not going to try to adjudicate the rights and wrongs from the beginning. I do not believe that if territorial displacement and dispossession was inherent in the Zionist project, I do not believe it can be a legitimate political enterprise. Now, you might say that's speaking from 2022 or 2024. Where are we
Four
now?
now, I think.
Okay. But we have to recognize that from nearly the beginning, for perfectly obvious reasons, having nothing to do with anti-Semitism, anti-Westernism, anti-Europeanism, but because no people that I am aware of would voluntarily cede its country.
Except for all the people that sold land voluntarily.
You can perfectly understand Native American resistance to Euro-colonialism. You can perfectly well understand it without any anti-Europeanism, anti-whiteism, anti-Christianism. They didn't want to cede their country to invaders.
I think
that's completely understandable.
You're minimizing the anti-Semitic element
you minimized
in Arab nationalism.
In all your books, you minimized.
No. The Husseini was an anti-Semite. The leader of the Palestinian national movement in the 30s and 40s was an anti-Semite. This was one of the things which drove him, and also drove him in the end to work in Berlin for Hitler for 4 years, with giving Nazi propaganda to the Arab world, calling on the Arabs to murder the Jews. That's what he did in World War II. That's the leader of the Palestinian Arab national movement.
Why is it?
And he wasn't alone. He wasn't alone.
Why is it that if you read your book, Righteous Victims, you can read it and read it and read it and read it, as I have, you will find barely a word about the Arabs being motivated by anti-Semitism.
It exists, though.
I didn't say it doesn't exist.
You agree that it exists.
Hey, I don't know a single non-Jew who doesn't harbor anti-Semitic
We're
sentiment.
talking about Arabs now.
Yeah, but I don't know anybody. That's just part of the human condition.
Anti-Semitism.
Yes,
Husseini was an ordinary
and among the Arabs.
So, Professor Morris, here's my problem. I didn't see that in your Righteous Victims. Even when you talked about the first Intifada, and you talked about the second Intifada, and you talked about how there was a lot of influence by Hamas, the Islamic movement. You even stated that there was a lot of anti-Semitism in those movements. But then you went on to say, but of course, at bottom, it was about the occupation. It wasn't about, and I've read it.
Yeah, but you're moving from different
I'm not moving.
ages, across
I'm
the ages.
talking about your whole book.
The occupation began in 67, the one you're talking about.
I looked and looked and looked for evidence of this anti-Semitism as being a chief motor of Arab resistance to Zionism. I didn't see it.
Did he make that claim?
I don't remember the word chief.
Yeah.
It's one of the elements.
Very binary
it's one
thinking
of the
when it comes
elements.
to analyzing. Yes, binary.
Please don't give me this postmodernism binary. You're the one.
No, but you are thinking in terms of black and white.
You're the one that said the chief motor. Do you have your book here?
You talk about
page 137.
You talk in black and white.
Page 37.
You're talking in black and white concepts when history is much grayer. Lots of things happen because of lots of reasons, not one or the other. And you don't seem to see that.